Hello and good morning. We are continuing the book Full Devotion, and we are holding now on page 24. This is our third class of many classes that will discuss this book. This book discusses what purpose is it that we do anything for God. Does God need anything of us? He asks us to do this and he asks us to do that. He wants to keep kosher and put our tefillin and have and keep Shabbos and all that. Does he really need that? And if he doesn't get it on time, is that going to be a problem? And what's going to happen? What effect do we really have with God? And we began by quoting the verse in the 6th portion of the 2nd book of the Torah, which we are currently studying, the 2nd book. This week is the 3rd portion of that book. And in that portion, the Torah predicts that the Jewish people are going to be taken into the land of Israel. And then God basically blesses the Jewish people. He says, when you serve me, and the word he uses, va'avadatem, or avoda meaning work, that not like creative work, which is on Shabbos, don't do any work. It doesn't say work, but it means creative work. This terminology is work. When you serve God, meaning working to serve God, then God will bless your sustenance. That means you'll have plenty of money, and you'll have your children. There will be no women who can't have children, and you will have a long life. He blesses the Jewish people with the 3 essential blessings. You can't ask for anything more. It's children, it's health, and the sustenance to support yourself and support your children. Everything else, good friends, and that your team should win the World Series. All of those things are secondary to the most important part of life, which is children, health, and sustenance. You should be able to survive. Of course, that is a reference to the Jewish people who are in Israel during the time when God is exposed, if you will, where things are right, and there was a temple, there's a place for everybody to congregate and see God. People were exposed to miracles all the time. We discussed the miracle specifically that in the same portion, which God says that when you go to when you go to Jerusalem, when you go to see God for the pilgrimage festivals, the 3 pilgrimage festivals in the year, nobody will touch any of your products or home. Nobody will ransack your house. Won't be anyone to rob or to steal. In other words, you can go confidently without worrying about what you're leaving behind and where the ganav is going to come from. And only God can write that. That's one of the truths that the Torah, the authenticity of the Torah, would be, because if God predicts something like that, and it didn't happen, and the Jewish people lived in Israel for thousands of years before the exile, before the temple was destroyed by the Babylonians, well, if that didn't happen, then it would be a big problem with the Torah. So the Torah says there, you're going to be blessed in all kinds of different ways, transcendent of nature type of miracles. But these miracles of life and of children and of sustenance, these miracles are contingent, it would seem, on avoda, on va'avadatem. That's what the word the Torah uses. And you shall serve God in the way of work, like a workout. So if you want to describe in Hebrew a person who's doing hard labor, like the Torah has talked about the Jewish people being in exile in Egypt in the last couple of portions, the word is avoda again. Somebody asked, or we begin right after the Manishtana and the Haggadah, we begin with avadim hayinu. We were avadim. That's a word for servant. Somebody asked about slave, but there is no word for slave in Hebrew because there is no such concept as a slave. You can't have a slave. But you can have a person who works very hard. There is a Jewish eved, a Jewish servant, and then there's a non-Jewish eved, a non-Jewish servant. Though both of them, the terminology is eved. Eved means a person who works hard. It's hard work. When you want to work leather, you use the word avoda as well. And the leather is worked. So we're talking about not just serving God, but working it. That's the very important word that the Torah uses, and upon which this essay is going to base itself. So that's what we learned the other week, and that we talked about the struggle. We began to discuss it last week, and that was at length, the struggle between the godly forces that everyone possesses, which the godly forces are the one which inspires people. Okay, today I'm going to go to shul. Today I'm going to say the Shema. Today I'm going to kiss the Torah. I'm going to study. Versus the animalistic forces that everyone also possesses. We have to have animalistic forces, or else we would be angels. Animalistic forces would include the need to eat, and the need to sleep, and so on. Need for recreation, the need for downtime. That's animalistic forces. The need for personal satisfaction and pleasure, enjoyment, and feeling good about ourselves. That's the animalistic tendency, like an animal who does things without thinking. It just does things by nature because it wants. An animal wants to eat, it goes and eats. A bird is hungry, it starts flying around and digging into the ground. It's all about nature. It's all about animalistic tendencies. Now, some people take those animalistic tendencies very far. Not just do they need to eat, but they need to actually. I mentioned last week, there's this great rabbi who was running the yeshiva in France, coming out of Russia, running in France, passed away 30 years ago. But he was completely removed from this world type of person. And he would demand from his students, you have to put butter on your bread. If you have to eat butter, eat the butter and eat the bread. What are you smearing on it for? Because you have to enjoy the bread. Which is a concept that most people don't even think of. When you finish this book, you'll understand at least where it's coming from, although the Rebbe reprimanded him for that and said, you cannot demand from your students to do what you do. That's a high level. You're on that level, you're fine, but these kids need to eat bread and butter smeared on the bread, and take it easy, But the point is, so that's the extreme side. Then there's the other extreme. People have to eat their meal perfect. And not just the food have to be a certain temperature, but the plate has to be warmed up, or else it affects the food, it makes it cold. And every single pinch of salt and pepper and whatever else you're putting in there has to be perfect. And it has to be at a certain time. And it has to be delicious. And if it's not, ay, 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 ay.
You got the best household.
She's making it for you, not for her.
I know.
So,
She wants to make it perfect for you.
there are people, so by the time you finish eating the meal, whether it's bread and butter or whether it's this perfect meal, it's really, your stomach is filled and you're ready to go. But people spend a lot of time and a lot of effort and many emotions on the desires, the deep desires, and I'm not criticizing it at all. Everybody enjoys a good steak and whatever it is, or a good nice piece of chocolate, or more than one, and that's how the world goes. But the animalistic tendencies that people have, with satisfying desires and feelings and wants and whims, may be in the way of allowing some spirituality to go forward. When we give into our animalistic tendencies, and it doesn't mean just simply to eat and to sleep, but it means to go overboard with all of these things and be so engrossed that we become more like an animal than like a person, that will affect the spiritual side of a person, because there is a struggle between the godly forces and the animalistic forces. It's a constant struggle. Even with a guy who wants your butter and your bread separated if you have to eat it, he also didn't have necessarily rid of his feelings. He just suppressed them when he had to. And so the struggle, or the work, the avodah, the workout in serving God would be that even the smallest, slightest suppressing of something goes a long way. When a person has a feeling, I have to have this car, and you don't get it. Okay, we're just taking a very generic example. And your animalistic side wants it because it's jealous of Schmerl down the street, or because they were told that this, once had a ride in it and it was so smooth and it was so nice and it was so blah, blah, blah. So you have to have, and you go there. And you buy yourself not such a fancy schmancy car. You buy yourself a box that moves on wheels. Moves, as long as the wheels turn, good. And then you upgrade to a nicer car, but you don't have your dream car. So tell me, you're not thinking every second about your dream car. Once you bought your other car, you spent money on it, you're going to spend time and effort on this car. You're going to clean it, and you're going to change the oil, and you're going to be very focused on this car. And you'll realize that, you know what, so I didn't get that car. Next year, the other cars are going to come out. So it's not, you suddenly realize, you wake up and you realize that feeling is just a fleeting, animalistic emotion. It's nothing. Emotions come and emotions go. Feelings come and feelings go. It's after Yom Kippur. It's every single time. You are famished. Or maybe not so famished, but you feel weak or faint or whatever. And a kid was walking around with a good, nice looking sandwich, and that's been sticking in your head. And it's now, and the end of you've done it, the shofar's been blowing, you prayed the prayers, you made Havdalah, and now you're going to dig in. And there's lox and cheese and there's cream cheese and there's cakes on the table and everything else. You say, well, I'm going to dig in now. I'm going to get 3 bagels, I'm going to put the lox on my thing, and I'm going to get the whitefish, and I'm going to get the cake, 4 pieces of cake, and I'm going to take the big drink. Within 5 minutes, it's over. It's your eyes, it's not even your stomach. And even, it's all been satisfied. It's finished. The feelings are gone. It's just a feeling, it's fleeting. It's out. But it's difficult. It's very hard to overcome feelings. Sometimes we feel the push is so strong, the desire is so deep that we completely become so obsessed with it we can't push it away. That's avodah. The Talmud talks about the early pious ones who would eat in the morning breakfast. Push the time off just for a little bit. Just for the sake of not giving in to these whims, to these desires. But you're hungry, you have to eat, don't you have to eat? Yeah, I'll eat in 5 minutes, not now. I'll eat in 10 minutes. I'll push it off a little bit. And not that in those 10 minutes I'm going to see, okay, 10 minutes, I'm going to count. That's the same thing. Study something or whatever. Do something else just for the purpose of suppressing, learning how to subdue, learning how to engage in this avodah idea. So that's what we were discussing last week. Page 24.
Things are not very clear.
What the numbers are in the 2 on top.
There's a 2, like chapter 2 on top, and the footnote on the first page would be 11. Okay, we went through the footnote last week, and we did the first paragraph last week, the first couple of paragraphs here. Now we're just going to run through the paragraph from the beginning of the page. To better comprehend the aforementioned verse, it is necessary to first understand the concept of avodah, which we just discussed, regarding which the verse states, "You shall serve," that's the avodah, "the Lord your God." Seemingly, the entire paradigm of servant and master only applies in this physical world, where a servant can enhance the life of his master by fulfilling his wishes. A servant is someone who is hired. Let's just say today's day and age, we don't use the word servant because it might not be politically correct, but you hire a worker in your house, a home worker, a house worker, a house cleaner, or maybe cleaner is not even the right word anymore for political. You can't use the word janitor, but the manager of filth in your building, or whatever. So, that's a servant. That's typically a servant. You pay the person a certain amount of money, and you expect and you demand for them to do the things that you either don't want to do or don't have the time to do. So you want them to clean the bathroom and the shower and the bathtub. You want them to fold the laundry. You want them to wash up the dishes. You want them to vacuum the floor. You want them to mop the outside. And you want them to put the chairs and tables back in order. And you want them to make the house look nice and smell nice. All right? That's a house cleaner, a house worker, or a servant. In the olden days, according to the Torah, you're allowed to have a servant. A servant meaning lives in your house and who is subservient to you. Oh, and by the way, before anybody goes crazy with that servant stuff, the requirement of the master over that servant is to provide that servant more than he or she provides themselves. If they sleep on this type of pillow, they have to provide for their servant. They can't do anything more than that. If they eat this kind of meal, they have to provide the servant the same meal. So the restrictions on it are very strong. So in fact, the Talmud says that one who acquired a servant really acquired a master, because you have to basically take care of them the way you would take care of the way the servants take care of you. That's anybody who wants to know if the Bible promotes slavery. Not quite slavery. There was no word for slavery. It's a service. You pay the person is gets back, but the person gets back what you get, not just what you think is enough. Not the bread and then the butter. They have to get everything. So that would seem like something that is important for people living in this world. You need a service, so you hire a person to serve. You hire a person who's called a servant, that they're serving you. But how do you consider a human being a servant to God? Because the word is used avodah, which is the service, and it's the same word as eved, which means a servant in the Torah. It's just from the same root of the word. And God says, I want you to avodah me. I want you to work like the same terminology that is used for a servant working for a master. So how does one understand our relationship with God as a servant? Why? Because one would think that a servant who is hired to work is there to fulfill certain needs that you either don't want to do or can't do. Let's continue. Although a human master is indeed a true master, nevertheless, there are things which he lacks. The function of the servant is to fill the master's need or to complete his wishes. By doing so, he enhances the life of the master, while the servant himself attains greater realization as well, because the servant is able to learn from the master and able to have a good life, and the Torah requires that the family of the servant has to be taken care of. There's nothing here in a vacuum. The person has to get taken care of, and all of his needs have to be covered. So since God is the ultimate of all, since God is the ultimate of all, however, it is not readily understood how avodah, service, can apply to him. How do you apply service as a servant to a master when you're talking about God? And by the way, this appears not just here, but it appears elsewhere in the liturgy of the high holidays. We say, if you please, one comes into my mind right away. There's more than one. Right after the blowing of the shofar, in the repetition of the Amidah. So this is already later on, after the main blowing of the shofar, as it goes on later in the service, we say a few words. And we say that today is the day when the world is shaking, or the world is being born. Today, everyone will stand in judgment before you. If we are like children to you, then have mercy on us like a father has, like a parent has mercy on the child. And if we are like servants to you, then our eyes are turned to you like a servant to a master. So we do, and a servant to a master means that a servant doesn't have anything, that the master has to supply and provide everything. So we ask for God, whichever way you want to look at us, as children, we're going to have mercy like a parent. Don't do injustice, don't give us a hard time of it. And if we are like a servant to you, well then, you still need to provide us with all our needs. Good. But how does one understand the relationship between a person and God, a human being, and God as a servant? A servant is a person who is designed to help and to fulfill the needs of the master. Does God have needs that need to be fulfilled? And if he doesn't, then how can we be called a servant? We can be called maybe a worker to help to build the world, or a partner. But what is a servant? What is the servant? The service of a servant per se added to our relationship with God. That's point number one that he wishes to discuss. Point number two. It is also necessary to resolve an apparent contradiction in the words of our sages in this regard. On occasion, we find that the concept of avodah, meaning serving, working as a servant to God, does not apply on high, does not apply to God. For example, the Midrash states, "For what does the Holy One, blessed be He, care whether a man slaughters an animal from the throat or the nape?" The Torah is very clear that the slaughtering of an animal must take place where the throat is. In other words, from the bottom of the animal. The nape, the back of the head, one cannot slaughter the animal. In other words, and this will be understood through another law, in slaughtering, whatever it might be, even if it's a little bird, a pigeon, which is a kosher bird, if one cuts off the head because the slice was too hard, that animal is considered, or bird, is considered treif. We must not cut off the head. It's not chopping off a head. Slaughtering of the animal is drawing its life out. The word for slaughtering in Hebrew is shchita. Shchita is the verb. A sheichet is the one who carries out shechita. He performs shechita. A sheichet, the slaughterer, performs the slaughtering. Shochet, the slaughterer. Shechita is what he does. The word shechita in Hebrew means to draw. And it's drawing out a life. That's the simple meaning of it. But more importantly, it's not drawing this animal to a higher level. Because when the animal is a kosher animal and it's slaughtered right, then the animal now can be eaten in a kosher manner. Meaning that when you eat it, it can become elevated if the energy is used for the right thing. It can be used for a mitzvah, a wedding, a bris, a Shabbos meal, a Yom Tov meal. That's a mitzvah to eat good meat on that day. Well, then that meat can be elevated. If it's not kosher, then it's called bound. It doesn't have the ability to be elevated. So the animal, the energy that we have is not kosher energy. It's the non-kosher energy. So slicing off a head is not the point. Shooting the animal or killing the animal, that's not what it's about. It's about doing a mitzvah of the animal. The sheichet who performs the slaughtering, he makes a bracha before he slaughters. It's a mitzvah to slaughter. And the mitzvah is to slaughter the throat, which is where the blood, and he has to sever both the esophagus and the jugular vein, the whatever it's called there. He's got to see it. So even if it's a little bird, you cut it open. You got to make sure those two pipes are open. And with a big animal as well. It's all the same idea, same concept. You're drawing out the life, or you're drawing up the animal. So the halacha is very clear. If you put a bullet through the head of the animal, or if you put one of these machetes, that's what, if you Tyson chicken is made that way. They just go through a conveyor belt, and then a knife comes and just slops up the head, because the animal needs to die. That's how non-kosher people do it. Or they take a bow and arrow, or they take a gun, they go hunting, and then they have, for 6 months, they have venison, they have deer. That's how it is. But in Jewish law, that's not, you cannot kill an animal. It's slaughtering the animal. And you've got to slaughter it from the throat. Slaughtering it from the nape, the back of the head, from the neck, makes the animal treif. Now, all right, wait a minute. So this is a question that the Midrash asked. Does it really make a difference to God if you slice the animal's throat this way, or if you cut off the head the other way? Then just get the animal dead. Does it really make a difference to God? Some people say Shabbos comes in at a certain time. Does it really make a difference if it's 5:22 or if it's 5:25? I mean, 3 minutes, God, can you spare the 3 minutes? Does it make a difference? Or Shabbos goes out at 6:20. Okay, so I had to go at 6:15. I just had to. I couldn't wait the 5 minutes. Does it really, can God not give me this 5 minutes? It's a good question. This great God can't grant you 2 minutes alone? Does it have to be so exact? I mean, are we a little OCD over here? All right, so it's a few minutes. So you can never come a few minutes late. You can never come a few minutes early. I mean, all right. All right. What's the problem here? That's what he's asking. Slaughtering has to take place specifically at the throat. There's so many steps in order for an animal to get kosher meat out of it. The reason why it costs more than the non-kosher is because of all these steps. You can't just take a hock and hock up the head of this animal. It just doesn't work that way. So everything has to take its time. Got to get a human being standing there. He's got to go this way and that way. By the way, if he only goes this way and he slices enough, the animal's treif. He's got to go this way and that way. There are so many nuances to all the laws, but even to this very simple thing of killing an animal or a bird. He's got to go this way and that way in order to fulfill the concept of what shchita. The word shchita means to draw. So you've got to take it and draw it back. And you can't knock off the head. Until the animal is, once you do that, then the animal's blood is drained and it stops, what's the word for it? Flipping around, whatever the word is there. Then you can take off. Then you can do whatever you want. But until that point, though, there's a certain respect. There's a certain relationship with the animal. Besides all the spiritual things. So does it really matter to God? I mean, does it really matter to God? The mitzvot, we're on page 26 now. The mitzvot were given merely for man to be refined. It's a very important thing. This is from the Midrash. God gives mitzvot to people, the commandments. There are 613 commandments. And the commandments, if they're all performed right, are a very good tool to refine a person as a human being, as a mensch. And when somebody who is like ultra-orthodox, very religious, and does something that's not a mensch, it hurts more. Because, all right, so somebody who behaves like a heathen now, but somebody is behaving, and it's so important to him to follow God, that it's pasnish. It doesn't fit. It's not right. Because if it's so important to you, then the rest of it should also be important to you. So we hold people to a higher degree if they're going to be so... And it's right, because the mitzvahs are given to people, and they are given to people so that the people should be refined. This means that mitzvot were given for the sole purpose of refining man, and they are of no significance on high, specifically. As the verse explicitly states, if you sin, what do you do to him? The people will say, I've seen this so many times. I used to be religious, and I was terrified. And one time I went out and I bought something which wasn't quite 100% kosher. My parents told me, no, I must never eat that. And I thought the lightning would strike. And when it didn't, I went and bought it again. And since then, nothing has happened to me. So it's all baloney.
When you read Chabad, a lot of the things that say that.
When you what?
When the Chabad.org, a lot of the articles talk about people who are trying to either go towards, more godly or less, or trying to find a reason to break the laws. And I read that all the time.
That's what people say. God didn't strike me, but you're missing the point. This is the verse in Job. I don't know if you've ever read the book of Job, but Job is towards the end of the Bible, and it's about a man who had everything. Children and health and sustenance and all of that, and then everything collapsed. His health fell, his children started to die, and his sustenance fell apart, his fields were flooded, and his warehouses were burnt, and all of that. And he has this 35-chapter dialogue with God. And basically God tells him, you'll never understand me. your complaints are legitimate, but and I'm not going to tell you my ways. You just can't understand my ways. Do you understand how I created the heaven? So you can't understand how I provide or don't provide. Do you understand how the birds get their thing, even if it's cold and even if it's rainy? Well, you don't understand that, and you won't understand that. That's my world. That's the way I run it. I can't explain it to you. I'm not saying your complaints aren't right, but I'm not going to be explaining to you my ways. And another thing he says, don't think that you are able to do anything. When you sin, as it says over here, the verse states clearly, if you sin, what do you do to him? And if your transgressions are many, what do you do to him? You think you're going to hurt God by doing it. If you are righteous, what do you give to him? On both sides. If you're sinning, what do you think? You think it's so great because I did so many wonderful things, now God owes me. But what have you done for God? God says, as far as I'm concerned, what have you done? And if that's the case, then what is God asking to? Avodah? Work hard for him like a servant? What is he needing? He says he doesn't need. A servant who is hired means that they have to satisfy certain needs. What needs? Which house are we cleaning here? Which closet are we organizing? What dishes are we washing? What bathrooms are we cleaning? We don't do anything with God anyway. Isn't that the case? And he's giving us the mitzvahs to refine us. Okay, so I don't want to be refined today. Today I want to be not a mensch. So I'm going to slaughter my animal from the neck and not from the throat. I'm going to show God. Now, that's one place. However, at other instances, we find that man's service does have an influence on high. As the Midrash states, regarding the verse, and now I beseech you, let the power of my Lord be great. This verse was said by Moses, and he was looking to. This is during the time of the spies who came back from Israel, and they brought a bad report, and the people rebelled and said, "We're not going into the land." And God made them stay for 40 years after that. So God says to Moses, "I'm finished. I'm fed up. I'm going to wipe them out. I'm starting a new people from you, Moses." And Moses gets into this prayer mode. And one of the things he says, and now, I beseech you, let the power of my Lord be great. So the Midrash says on this verse, the power of my Lord be great. What does that mean? He says when the Jews perform the will of God, they add strength, power, to the power of heaven. All right, wait a minute. You just said that God doesn't need anything. Now you're saying that what we do adds power, adds strength to God. How does that make sense? If God is this God that doesn't need anything, then what are we adding? And if we have to add, then why does God say I don't need you? Or why does God say you don't help me? It doesn't do anything to me. What does all this mean? Similarly, we find that the lack of avodah, the lack of this work, this toil that we need to engage in, creates weakness, so to speak, in the heavenly realms. So not only does God be enhanced by what we do, but if we don't do it, he is weakened, if you can say that. As the Midrash states, regarding the verse, you have weakened the rock that gave birth to you. Zu gesund. The verse says you have weakened the rock that gave birth to you. Now this verse is at the end of the Torah, the second to last portion of the Torah, and this whole portion, basically almost the entire portion, is a song. And in that song, so it's written in poetry form, and Moses presents this poetry, this song, and the song is filled with warnings. You need to follow the words of God, and it goes into a lot of different expressions of you have to follow God, and but in the end God will look after you, and He will take revenge for you, and everything will be fine. It's a pretty harsh song, and doesn't sound like a happy tune. But there's some interesting verses in there. One of the verses is, "You have weakened the rock that gave birth to you." That's what the verse says. What does that mean? Says the Midrash, when Israel does not perform the will of God, i.e., when they lack in their performance of Torah and mitzvot, they weaken, as it were, the great power of heaven. So we find over here a bunch of different and conflicting information here from the sages in the Midrash, and from the Torah, and from the prophets, which is from biblical standpoint, from the sages standpoint. We find that God's asking us to be a servant, to work, to toil like a servant works for his master. The question is an obvious one. What relationship is a servant to a master, or Jewish people to God? What relationship does that entail? Because it would seem that a servant is there to fulfill the needs of a master. What needs are we fulfilling when we work or we toil like a servant? The next question is, if the mitzvahs are given to us to refine the person, then it seems to be a very simple human need. We are born with tendencies, and we are born with needs, and we are born with urges, and we have to work on ourselves to refine ourselves, to make ourselves more pleasant. So what is God getting from this? On the other hand, we say that God says, I don't need it. Indeed, God says, I don't need what you do. It doesn't help me, it doesn't enhance. On the other hand, though, we find all kinds of places where God says, you do enhance me. And if you don't follow my will, you weaken me. So what is it exactly? So this will be the discussion of the book now. Okay. To explain. Look in footnote 22. The following chapter provides a Kabbalistic answer to this question, a more Hasidic answer. In other words, the following chapter is going to talk a lot about the mystical, esoteric system of how things come from God. And the Hasidic answer will be more practical, like how do we apply this mysticism to ourselves. So the more Hasidic answer, which is also the focus of this discourse, begins in chapter 5. To explain, Hasidus, or Hasidic teachings, cites Avodat HaKodesh. Avodat HaKodesh is a book, a Kabbalistic book, written by a great Kabbalist who lived in the 1500s. It was either Western Europe, like Spain, or North Africa, around there. So he wrote a book called Avodas HaKodesh, and the word Avodas HaKodesh is a play on biblical words, which means the holy service, and in which he talks a lot about mysticism, and he answers a lot of philosophical questions in several books that he writes. And he deals with this issue as well. What do we enhance God? He talks a lot about this in very heavy, mystical, Kabbalistic terms. So he writes a book, and this is his magnum opus. This is his big work, Avodas HaKodesh, the big book. And in this book, he discusses the Kabbalistic concepts, and this is an authority on real Kabbalah. So he writes as this. Hasidic teachings cites the Avodas HaKodesh that the aforementioned statement of our sages, which is, for what does the Holy One, blessed be He, care? Like, why would He care about what we do if the mitzvahs are given to us for refinement purposes? Why would it bother Him what we do? Or would He mind if the animal is slaughtered from its throat or from its neck? Is that such a big deal? That idea refers to the singular master sources of all sources, who is indeed not concerned at all over the performance of mitzvah. Now please keep your page, because we're going to the footnote of 25. The singular master, take that word master, source of all sources. Okay, so we're looking at footnote number 25. singular master, source of all sources. This unusual expression, this is a long footnote, this unusual expression refers to the highest aspects of godliness. This expression appears to have been used by Avodat HaKodesh to specifically address the effect of divine service upon the heavenly realms. The term master indicates that service is somewhat relevant at this level. In other words, as remote as God may be expressed in this, the singular master and highest of all high, source of all sources, yet he's still calling himself a master. When you say there's a master, by definition, a master can only be a master over others. There has to be someone else involved as well, or else you're not a master. It's like in Hasidic teachings, Kabbalistic, mystical expressions, it says, there's no king without a people. A king can be as great as he wants to be, but if he doesn't have a nation, he's nothing. You can't be a king over your children, and you can't be a king over your animals. You have to have people who accept your sovereignty. Then you are a king. If not, you're a dictator, or whatever, but you don't do anything. Talking about King Obama now? Hussein Obama? Anyway, so when you say master, master means that there is others involved there. So as singular of a source that this may be, it's not so singular. When you call that source or force, you call it a master. And that's what he's saying here. This expression appears to have been used by Kabbalah Coffee to specifically address the effect of divine service upon heavenly realms. The term master indicates that service is somewhat relevant at this level, because a master has to have someone who works for him. Yet the connotation of singular is opposite, implying that he is alone and he has no need for this service. If you say singular, then he's alone. He's on his own. But when you say master, you're saying that master over something. So this term is contradictory. Although divine service does not actually affect this level, which is the highest level of God, the source of all sources, higher than any level of giving or creating and bringing other forces into his world, God's world. We're talking about the source of all sources, the highest of the highest, before it's anything. That although divine service does not actually affect this level, there is nonetheless a use for it even there. As high as it may be, as remote or as singular as it may be, there is still a need, or there's still an implication that something else is around there, so something else is floating around. As will be explained in the continuation of the discourse regarding the function of divine service as it relates to God's essence. In other words, why would God require something in his essence? Because his essence cannot possibly be defined as needy. God's essence is what would you need more than that? It's everything. It's higher than everything. It's all. So what's necessary there? So that will be addressed as we move on. But at some level, there's still a need over there, as will be expressed in this discourse. This is why singular master is the source of all sources. In other words, a level that is not related to the finite construct of the spiritual worlds, not even as their source. The spiritual worlds, as we've been discussing over this last year, has a certain order. It starts on the higher, and as each level is visited by this energy of God that's projected on the highest level, as things move lower and lower, the energy becomes less and less intense. It's like going through a filtration system. Like water that comes and it's salty and it's dirty and it's smelly, and it goes through many, many different filters and cleansing agents until what comes out is the same water. But from that water you've extracted that which made it salty, that which made it dirty, that which made it smelly. That takes quite a series of filterings and cleansings until that can happen. If you have a pool, if you ever had a pool, and the pool was green and you wanted to clean it out, you needed a whole bunch of different things. You need to run through a filter for about 2 weeks, and you need to put in the chlorine, and you need to put other chemicals until it's the same water. You're not changing the water necessarily. It's not, the water isn't dirty. The water is just filled with dirt that you need to remove, and then the water was clean. So we call it dirty water, but really the water is just water. Things have been added to it, contaminants and bacteria and germs and smells and whatever. So it's the same thing, the same idea with God's projection to this world. He projects from his essence. Starts from the essence. The essence of God is nothing to do with this world. You can't even compare it to this world. This world is so limited, is so small, and it's nothing. You know that what's it called? No, you get this in the email. It's a PowerPoint, and it shows you magnified the smallest item in this world, and we blow it up 3 million times, and you see, in this little tiny mite, you see it looks like a monster, and there's this and that and the other, all different things that go through it to make it up. And then it gets smaller and smaller, and less. It gets to things that are bigger and bigger and bigger until you get to the world, the globe, and then it shows you in the screen. It shows you how nothing. The world is, you can't even see it when you go just in the Milky Way, and then the Milky Way you can hardly see when you go to the rest of it, and you just see how insignificant it all is. And even that is just a limited space. It's a few trillion miles, or a few trillion miles, but it's limited. All of it is all limited, and it's to God's essence that is above anything, transcends anything. The limitations are silly. Like, what are you doing? It's childish. It's nothing. It's play. So the way this world works is with a transformation of energy as it continues down until you get to the smallest of the smallest, the lowest of the low, little mite. That's how the energy of God comes down from level to level. That's called the normal level of projection. So this level is not related to the finite construct of the spiritual world. There is a finite level to the spiritual world as well. The finite means it starts at one place and ends in another place. Rather, it is a source of sources, removed even from the sources, as much as the sources are removed from mundane matters. The source of the energy of God also has no connection to the comparison to this world, because it's got to go through so many filters and cleansing agents, if you will, until it gets down to this world, and then you have a world. So the sources which are just a projection, part of God's projection to start a world and to create a universe. That source also is higher than anything that this world, very finite, limited world has. So when you say the source of sources, that the sources themselves are so removed from this world, you talk about the source of sources, it's even more removed from that. Okay? So I hope I'm making sense over here. It is the ultimate reason why everything exists, but does not relate to anything that is even remotely finite. Everything exists because of God's essence, but there is really, to compare this world to God is beyond comparison, even from dirty water to clean water, because at least we understand how that works after many, many different series of filters. But it's comparing it to, let's say, to taking a seed and putting it into the ground, and the seed completely decomposes, and only then can it somehow unleash, not just to create another seed, not just to create another apple, but to create a whole tree that will provide millions of apples in perpetuity if it's taken care of. Just from one little seed. That's like from the finite to an infinite level. So really the seed has within it an amazing infinity. But it's not really the seed even. The seed is only a map for the earth to make that happen. The seed can't possibly. It's like a little DNA. It's like nothing there. It's the power of the earth or whatever's growing this thing that is really unleashed by the seed. So you're talking about to compare an apple tree to the seed that produced it is ridiculous. There's no comparison. Yet, that's how this world works. So we understand how that works for somehow. We get it. How we don't know. We can't explain how it works, but we understand how. We know how it works. We can't really explain that idea. So similarly, when we talk about the energy of God, we talk about the source of all sources. The source of this world is remote, is not finite, it's infinite. It's got to go through many different levels until it comes down to this world. The source of that source is even way beyond that, which is what the term is given for God, the source of all sources. However, if we grant that there is an ultimate purpose for everything, which would include even divine service attached to lower spiritual realms, which is what we are here in this world, all the way down in the lowest possible level that can be from the remotest godly greatness. So if our service is attached to this very finite world, when the ultimate plan for everything is fulfilled through divine service, the outcome would be of concern to even this highest level of godliness. In other words, if God decided to project from himself whatever it was to create this world, and it came all the way down to this world, and it made the troops are marching in.
No, it's Josh. I'm at the rabbi's. I'm at the rabbi's house.
Be 2 more minutes and we'll be done. So, what was that?
Yeah, south of the stadium.
Yes, that's glory.
Look where all the cars are.
Oh. All right. So the bottom line is that
Sorry about that.
when God started all of this, there's a reason why he made this world. And we believe, and it's told in the Torah, that the reason is so that somehow we should do things and it should affect the divine essence. You should be happy or unhappy, strong or weak, if you will. Hence, this variation of the term master would apply even at the highest levels of godliness, because on some level, somehow, when God decided to create this world, he had in mind that we should be sitting here and studying Torah, his Torah, on December 28th today, or the 26th day of Tavis, that we should be sitting here studying Torah and fulfilling his wish of us to sit and study Torah. So when he started it all, this was in his mind. So we should be sitting here studying Torah. So somehow, what we do does affect on some way. The discourse will clarify the level within godliness to which this expression refers. So we are prepared for some very nice and deep and remote Kabbalistic, mystical issues, and but eventually it will all come down to earth, as it always does.